Welcome back. Got another episode of Don't F With Your People. I'm happy to bring another topic that's got kind of a number of different meanings, and it really didn't start that way when I first jotted down the topic of assume nothing. Assume nothing was really built around the concept of saying, when you're problem solving, make no assumptions. Start from the beginning. Don't assume that somebody had already tried this, somebody had already done that this had been tried before, even if you're picking up a problem in the middle of the process. And if you're working in the technology field, which is what I did for 35 plus years, it's oftentimes where you're picking up a project or a problem right in the middle of the process, and sometimes the easy thing to do is to try to just pick it up in the middle. And you got to force yourself to kind of say, let's start from the beginning. Let's retrace our steps here and make no assumptions about what it is that's been tried up to this point. And the saying about assuming, again, it's kind of cliche. If you assume, it's going to make an ass out of you, and it's going to make an ass out of me. Assume spells ass and me. And again, I think that's very solid, basic problem solving theory in life, for that matter. It's like, car won't start. Well, are you going to assume it's because the battery's dead? Or are you going to assume it's because it's out of gas? You just can't make any assumptions. You got to go through these things. Maybe it's because the gear shift is not in park. Cars won't turn over if the gear shifter's not in park. So there's a number of things that you shouldn't assume when things aren't working out your way. So you need to work through those things and kind of start from the beginning. PCs, another great example of, okay, your PC won't boot up. Well, is it plugged in? If it's a desktop, if it's not plugged in, it's not going to work. If it's a laptop, is the battery charged? Just real basic stuff. And if you've ever taken a support call from your parents, and if they're a little older, you got to start from the beginning. You just never know what they've done or haven't done, and you don't really want to waste a lot of time going back to retrace those steps. But you also know, if you don't do that, you might have skipped over the most obvious thing and wasted a bunch of time in that process. Now, I'll go way back to the early 90s when I was taking phone support calls. And when I first got on phone support, I was really self-conscious. I was a new guy. I didn't know a lot of the technical answers. And so when I got on the phone with banks and I was, getting those questions from the banks, I really wanted to kind of jump to the more sophisticated questions. And, so I was, not asking the real basic questions about either their hardware or the software, for that matter. And so I'd really try to come up with a real sophisticated question and kind of jump into the middle of it. And what I realized over time is, I'd listen to the more senior guys sitting next to me, taking the same phone support calls, and I'd listen, and they would go right to the very beginning, the very basics. Okay, is your PC plugged in? Okay, and the keyboard, it's plugged in, the monitor is plugged in. Like, they would assume nothing. They would go through the very basics and just build up from there to make sure they had left nothing out, because they had learned through time that it's the most obvious things in a lot of cases that would burn you. You'd spend hours deep diving into these detailed, fancy solutions to the problem, and then all along it was the real basic thing. The damn thing wasn't plugged in the whole time. So that was one of those hard lessons. And over time, as I learned, once I got more sophisticated in my knowledge, in terms of, I knew all the same things everybody else, that was a senior support person knew. First thing I did was go right back to the basics. I had the confidence to say, it's okay to ask the obvious question, the real basic question, because they weren't going to question my knowledge. I was a senior guy, But going back to the basics, assuming nothing, is really, really just foundational, and it will save everybody a lot of time in the end. Now, the flip side to this, and the thing I wasn't probably planning on talking about for one of these episodes, was the assuming nothing from the standpoint of life. I think I went through a lot of my adult life kind of probably having general assumptions about people, cities, religions. I mean, you name it. I probably had a picture in my mind about what things were like and what people were like and so forth, and really didn't give it a lot of additional thought. As I got older, I realized I wanted to have a more open mind to those things. I wanted to have a more open mind to foods and to travel and to other cultures and things of that nature. And one of the things and one of the people that really kind of opened my mind to some of this, believe it or not, was a TV show hosted by Anthony Bourdain. He was originally a chef in New York City, wrote a really pretty famous book that Kitchen Confidential, that really talked about what it's like to be in the kitchens of New York City, and that made him somewhat famous. And so then he started doing a travel show where he'd meet with people over food. They'd talk about the food, they'd talk about the culture, but he had a really great way of diving into those cultures and talking about the foods and so forth, and it just really opened my mind up into what it was like to travel the world. My point of this is he had a tattoo. He's passed away now. He had a tattoo, I think it was in Latin, but it basically roughly translated to, "I am certain of nothing." And I just love that saying, because it's essentially on steroids. I assume nothing. I'm certain of nothing. I like to have an open mind about just about anything in life, being open to new adventures, being open to new foods, cultures, music, and some of that you got to get out of your comfort zone to try these things. In many cases, I think as you get older, there's a tendency to want to hunker down and do the things you're most comfortable with, and just kind of coast into things. I've kind of chosen to do it the other way, challenge myself to not just coast, not just do it the same old. I'll give you a really bizarre example. My wife and I traveled to Barcelona, Spain a couple years ago, and we went to a beautiful monastery on the outside of Barcelona, or outside of town, Montserrat, beautiful on the side of a mountain, just incredible. And there were, masses going on throughout the day, and partly just because of timing, and partly because we were just open to new adventures. We were not Catholic. Nonetheless, we sat through a mass, and the mass was presented in Catalan. Catalan being the language, and did not know this till we got to Spain. The primary language in many parts of Spain is Catalan, and Spanish is secondary. They teach both languages in a lot of the schools in Spain, and depending upon the government systems that are in place in different regions, Spanish and Catalan are kind of going back and forth in terms of what is the first and the second language. Nonetheless, new learnings. But we sat through a mass that we didn't know the language, weren't sure what they were saying, but it was one of the most beautiful things we ever did because of the surroundings. We were there in the moment, and just kind of soaked it all in. Wasn't necessarily a religious experience, but it was an experience of being somewhere in a foreign land, in a foreign place, just taking in the experience. And I have zero regrets about having spent that 45 minutes in a place, in the quiet, in a sense, and enjoying that with my wife, and doing something completely different. We'll never forget it. So I know that's a bit off the topics of what you're going to do as a leader, as a person leading your teams, your personal life, stuff like that. But I think you can take that and run with that in any way you want to do that. Your inspirations for how you become a better leader can come from a number of different things. I can tell you, in my early days of being a manager, oftentimes I went to church I do not fancy myself to be a hugely religious person at this point in my life, but I went to a Lutheran church for most of my youth and a large part of my adult life, and I really enjoyed the sermons from a lot of my pastors throughout my time, and in many cases I took away from those sermons little nuggets of inspiration and things I would use to become a better leader, to become a better husband, to become a better father. So you'll find inspiration from whatever you choose to dig into. So I guess with that, I appreciate you coming to the channel. If you enjoy these messages, like and subscribe, tell your friends about it, share it, push it out. Also send messages. If there's other topics you want me to talk about, drop me a message down below. Really appreciate you coming. Thank you.